Welcome back to another episode of Senior to Seniors, the podcast where we learn to grow and to stay connected through the wisdom of real estate stories and real people. I'm your host, Jim Mazziotti, and today's conversation is one that touches on something many seniors quietly face. It's the slow, subtle influence of people who claim to guide us, protect us, and sometimes know better than we do. Sometimes those voices are helpful, and sometimes they lead us down a path we never intended to walk. Our guest today, Peter Young, lived through nearly 20 years of that kind of influence, a journey that began with trust and spiritual curiosity and slowly turned into control, isolation, and emotional captivity. His memoir, Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger, is not just a story about a cult. It's a story about marriage, identity, faith, and the courage it takes to reclaim your life. Peter's experience offers powerful lessons for all of us, especially seniors, about recognizing manipulation, protecting our independence, and finding our way back to clarity and community. Peter Young, thank you so much for being here. Your story is going to help a lot of people today.
Jim, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
It's great to have you. So I got through your book. I just got it a few days ago. I haven't had it for a long time. Didn't realize it would be as deep as it is. And it's a very deep tell-all story that will grip anybody that grabs this book. You can find it on Amazon. Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger. And the subtitle is My Journey In and Out of a Cult. So before I start asking you questions, why don't you give us an overview of what your book is about? Tell us about your story. It's a crazy story.
It is crazy. It's bizarre. But as I say on the last page, it's triumphant. It's miraculous. It is messy, but it is my story, and no matter what our story is, we have to own it.
Yeah.
So I unwittingly married into a tiny little religious cult when I met the love of my life back 29 years ago. I was a sports broadcaster in little old Pocatello, Idaho, doing the 6 and 10 sports, mid to late 20s. Met Paige, as I call her in my book. We got married about 9 months later. She grew up in a home where they had this guru called Uncle Robert, who wasn't related to anybody in their family. He was from Syria, came to America. Paige's family was from kind of the Northwest in Canada. And so she grew up in this world where he was the expert on everything. So she brought him to our marriage. And I knew of him. She talked about him all the time. And I kind of thought, well, he's odd and eccentric, but somewhat harmless. And for the first few years of our marriage, I thought we had the greatest marriage ever. I was the best husband ever. She the best wife. We lived in Idaho. Uncle Robert, his real name is Robert Booty, lived in California. So he didn't have a huge influence on our life. But that changed. I became the proverbial frog in the pot of hot water that became boiling water. Fast forward 20 years, I was brainwashed. My whole family was, my 5 kids. And he engineered the destruction of my marriage and family. I doubted my faith. My world was completely turned upside down. So I, in effect, got kicked out of the cult when my wife left me. And then the Lord really rescued me, opened my eyes and ears to the truth. Friends and family who knew nothing of the cult, right? Surrounded me with love and support. And so I got over it and I became healthy. And I really saw what it was. It was a cult. He was a tiny cult leader. And so now I go on podcasts and I wrote my book to use my story as a cautionary tale so other people don't go through what I did, because the journey in and out of a cult is not fun.
Oh man. And the book reads that you're terribly, terribly in love with Paige. Who you married. Um, and it's so evident the way that you wrote that your love was pretty spectacular. and I think on both sides. So it was really surprising when it was, when you made clear that Uncle Robert was changing things, or things were just slowly changing over time.
Right.
And then there were deep held beliefs in by Paige and her family that they couldn't escape. Um, Tell me, with Uncle Robert, he wasn't related in any way. How, was he a friend of the family? They called him Uncle Robert, and that was kind of, they called a lot of people, in friendly terms like that, or
Right.
even as,
Right.
where did he come from?
Sure, great question. So yeah, Uncle Robert was kind of like an honorary title. He was born and raised in Syria, came to America, met a fairly normal American woman in Tennessee, and then he met my former in-laws at a tiny seminary in Fresno, California, late 60s, early 70s, and then really glommed onto my former in-laws and started this very parasitic, one-sided, dominant relationship to where he was, again, he was the expert in everything. So my former in-laws looked up to him for everything, even though they're about the same age. So
Hmm.
then this was before Paige was born. So then she was born into this home. They lived in the interior of British Columbia, homeschooling. At times they were destitute, other times they did have some money. So it was a very different upbringing than mine. And Robert lived in Southern California all these years, and he would come and visit, or he would call on the phone and talk to my former in-laws, but they never really lived together in like a commune. But
Yeah.
his control, his emotional, psychological, mental, and spiritual control was incredible and very deep.
Yeah, well, and you questioned yourself, your faith, and who you were, and thought there must be something wrong with me,
Right.
and in Paige, I think in a letter to you, basically told you uh, you're not a man of God.
Yeah.
She called you out on the whole thing. It sounds like Robert was a smart guy, an intellectual guy. Was he? Because it seems like everybody ran to him for anything. I mean, he was kind of not only the spiritual guru, but the know-it-all of everything. Did I get it right?
You did absolutely the know-it-all of everything, and that's one of the key lessons that I like to share with people is they'll look at me and they'll say, how did you fall for this? How did you fall into a cult? Or you'll hear about cults in the news, and well, I would never be dumb enough to fall for that. My
Yeah,
point is that cult leaders don't start off spouting utter nonsense. They sound really smart at first, and then they take the truth, and in our case, he would read to us from the Bible, and then he gives it a little perverse spin, just a little bit, right, with every little verse, with every little statement of truth, and then he twists it so that 5, 10, 15 years down the road, you're nowhere near the truth. You're nowhere near what the gospel really says, but it's a very slow, subtle process, so it takes a while.
yeah. Well, it's like you know, like a map. If you're drawing the route to go from where I'm at in Dallas, Texas, to go to Bozeman, Montana, if that line is off by just a little bit,
Right.
you'll end up in a completely different place than where you were going. And that sounds exactly like what was happening with how they, characterize you, or he characterized the Bible.
Right.
And
Yeah, the analogy I give is like if you miss hit a golf ball by this much, and if it's just audio, I'm holding my fingers apart by like an eighth of an inch. When I miss hit a golf ball, it's this much. But if you miss hit the golf ball by just a little bit, 100 yards down the fairway, it's way off to the left, way off to the right. You may have intended it to go straight towards the pin, but it's going to be nowhere near there, just like your analogy.
yeah. So, um, how did you end up believing all this, Peter? I just can't believe. When I read your book, I read it that you're a smart guy. You're not a dummy. You know where you're going, what you're doing. You've had a lot of success in your life. You've worked with CBS and ESPN and OLN and other networks. Your work has really shows up. Um, how did it happen? Just
Another great question. I always kind of unwind it this way. Cult leaders really prey on the vulnerable.
yeah,
So if you have a vulnerability, then they'll find it, they'll seek it out kind of like water, whether it's going to go to the lowest spot. They'll find it and then they will exploit it. Well, for me, my vulnerability was I love my wife and I wanted to protect my marriage. And that, believe it or not, made me vulnerable. You wouldn't think so. You think, well, that's just a man who loves his wife and wants to stay married. But Uncle Robert knew that. And my wife adored and revered and respected this man in ways that she didn't me. And so for the first 5 or so years, I kind of looked at him like a nuisance, like a gnat that just wouldn't go away. And then I
Yeah.
wanted him to go away. And then it
Mhm.
became, I'm going to ask the difficult questions. And now I look like an idiot to my wife because I ask questions, because cult leaders don't like questions. And then it
Yeah.
became slowly, I went along to get along. And then finally, like you said, maybe I missed something all these years. And I just
Yeah.
got worn down, beaten down over all those years.
And I imagine that happens to so many people, even if it's not diving into a cult, but being controlled by others,
Mm.
right? With their family is another. Peter, many seniors have trusted advisors, they have spiritual leaders or longtime friends who influence their decisions. So looking back, what were the earliest signs that the influence in your life was shifting from guidance to control? What were the earliest signs of that that you can remember?
There were a lot of little ones. This one is a little kind of funny. It's an anecdotal story, but I'll tell you because it sets up for what else I'm going to share. I go to meet my future in-laws. So Paige and I've been dating about 2 months. I drive up to northern Idaho where they live, and I go down the hall to use the bathroom. And I'm a guy, and I stand up to go pee. And then when I come out, my future father-in-law is standing right there in the doorway. And he says, I heard you go into the bathroom. I know that's kind of weird. In
Yeah,
our house, the men need to sit to pee. It's cleaner, prevents splashing, etc. And then he said, Uncle Robert taught me that. And I heard that phrase, Uncle Robert taught me that 100 times or more over the next 20 years. And at first I thought, well, that's kind of weird and creepy. But that same idea of control kept popping up over and over and over again to where it became, in every aspect of our life, his word was sovereign. And so there was no really one moment where I thought, wow, this is wrong, this is unhealthy. There were a lot of little moments where I recognized it, but didn't do anything about it because I kind of knew in the back of my mind, well, if I do something about this or try to, my marriage is at stake. It's at
yeah,
risk.
yeah. Everything will fall apart.
Yeah.
And, what we haven't told the audience is, at that time, the peace scene, if you will, which I remember reading that very well, it was awkward and, real weird, you know.
Yep.
Um, but if I can imagine if you would have said anything to anybody at that time, the wheels on the bus would have come off. You had one child, I believe, at that time.
No, I,
And
I had just met him. So we weren't even engaged yet. That was
oh,
the
that's
first
right. That's right.
time I met my future father. That's like my first remembrance of meeting this man. I had just met him 5 minutes prior. And then he meets
Wow.
me to come out the door.
Wow, you really blew it in impressing them with the first time you met him, didn't you?
Little did I know
Wow.
that. Yeah.
Oh my God. So let's talk about relationships a little bit because I know seniors often fear losing relationships and knowing that if they speak up or push back, that everything can fall apart like it did for you. So in those silent years, what would you say to someone who feels the same pressure that you felt? You took action at a later time, but this went on for a long time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what advice would you give, especially to seniors, who my audience is made
Right.
up with? And I think they face a lot of pressure from family and
Right.
friends to make decisions that are um, really important as life goes. Uh, what would you say to them about dealing with the pressure of that?
Sure. And my answer is kind of like 50-50. Here's the red flags to watch out for and advice.
Okay.
Cult leaders control their members through isolation, paranoia, and secrecy. So I would imagine people that have nefarious ends, and aren't a cult leader do the same thing. They isolate that person. They inflict them with paranoia or doubt and secrecy. Don't share this with anybody else. Don't,
Yeah.
I'm your lawyer, don't tell your accountant. I'm your accountant, don't tell your lawyer, right? So for cult leaders, that's how they gain a lot of control. So there's your red flag, right? Don't allow yourself to become isolated. We really only listened to one voice and trusted one voice. That was Uncle Robert. Because we would go to church after church after church and then leave because, of course, the pastor never knew the true gospel. And so then we would have to leave.
Huh.
So the advice is that make sure you stay in fellowship, in communication with several people. The Bible verse is escaping me, but it says something along the lines of, there is wisdom in multiple advisors. It's kind of like the opposite of too many cooks spoil the soup. It's more
Mhm.
along the lines of, don't just have one voice, in your life. You know what? If you have an accountant and an attorney and an agent, whomever, you know what? Trust all of them and don't just listen to one voice. Have multiple voices and people in your life that you can trust, not just one.
I think that's probably great advice. Um, so many older adults, I'm in real estate, and so I deal with a lot of older adults. That's kind of my specialty in my life, and that's where I've migrated to. And I know they struggle with tension. Many struggle with tension between faith and fear.
Mhm.
And, so how did you eventually distinguish between genuine spiritual growth that I'm sure you were grasping, trying to find spiritual growth and spiritual manipulation? How did you finally distinguish between the two?
Yeah, I wish I had distinguished it much sooner and in a much less painful journey. In the Christian faith, there is the idea, and I'm sure it's in a verse that it's escaping me as well, that there is victory in Christ. We have victory in Christ. We, access to the throne, to eternal life, etc. And so there's also another verse that says there's no fear in love. And yet, under Uncle Robert, and I'm sure this is true with other cult leaders, is they get you to doubt yourself. I came to a point where I was a shadow of a man. I walked around on eggshells. I was scared of Uncle Robert. I was scared of my wife, even though I loved her. I doubted every single word out of my mouth. I doubted every thought. Oh, I'm the most wicked, awful person on the face of the earth. I must not be a believer. So it was the exact opposite that, if someone is truly trying to help you grow in your faith, that you have victory in the Lord, that there is peace. The fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control, doesn't say fear or anxiety or in doubt. They're the exact opposite. And so I really didn't learn this until my life just came crashing down on me. I was never suicidal, but I had a really rough year in 2017. I say that I didn't just hit rock bottom. I bounced along on the bottom, the rock bottom for a couple months. And the lesson that I learned is this, and this is probably the good red flag for your audience, is that the Christian faith to me is pretty simple. You are saved, you're born again, and then you grow in your faith, right? You're born again, and then you learn to crawl, walk, and then run. Well, you can't switch the order. And anyone that tries to tell you to switch the order is acting as a gatekeeper to God, which is what a lot of cult leaders try and do. In other words, in our little cult, we had to know and learn certain things that only Uncle Robert knew. And so
Hmm.
we had to kind of pass these tests, these exams, these quizzes, if you want to call them that, before we would be ready to be saved. And then after going through that, we would realize we weren't saved and he would kind of save us. And that's just wicked and unbiblical. And
Yeah.
run from that person.
Yeah. So obviously you have friends and as a couple, Paige and yourself, as a couple, you had friends. Could they see through this? Could they see this was happening, or did you hide it? I mean, is that part of the manipulation? You, of
Mhm.
course, hide it, either because well, why would you hide it? You
Yeah,
know?
so we definitely hit it. There's no question. So again, we didn't look like a cult. We weren't out on the street corners trying to, raise money or bring in more acolytes. We kept it hidden. I heard many times the idea about don't throw your pearls before the swine, the pearls of Uncle Robert's wisdom, because of course only he knew the true gospel. Only he knew what was really the problem with the world. And so the powers that be were always out to get him. We had to shred our trash. We couldn't say certain words on the cell phone because all of this would endanger Uncle Robert. So we kept it hidden. And the scary thing is, Jim, I'm on network TV. I'm traveling around the world as a sports broadcaster. I got my jacket and tie on. I look like a normal guy. No one had any idea. And yet, my home life, I'm being psychologically manipulated with undue manipulative mind control by this little narcissist. And we effectively hit it. Which then the scary part is, well, if it happened to me, how many other times is this happening around the country where these little cults exist and they stay hidden? Scary thought.
Well, I can think in my life there are people who, I've questioned as to who who is guiding them because something is off, something isn't just right. Do you have any advice for people who might sense that as to should somebody have grabbed you and said something to you, or would you not have listened anyhow? Because you were terribly in love with Paige, right? And
Right,
and eventually you had 5 children, and you didn't want to blow this whole
right.
thing. Would you suggest if you sense something like what you were going through that someone try to grab you and say, you know, come with, listen,
Right, right.
shake. I could just want to shake you, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. Well, it's such a loaded question, and I'll try and be brief because there's multiple answers. But the short answer to your question really is it depends on when that person would have approached me. So early on, I thought the guy was nuts. I actually approached Paige about 4 years into our marriage when I first learned about his crazy theory that, the Jews are out to control the world. They're trying to get back the
Yeah.
birthright that Jacob stole from Esau. And it's like, wow, and I'd ask for proof of this, and he would never give me any. He would just tell me how dumb I was. So I had tried to extricate ourselves from it, and that didn't work. So if somebody had said to me back then, hey, I've heard this Uncle Robert speak, he's crazy. Peter, let's get you out. Maybe that might have helped. My wife might have left me then. 5, 10 years later, if that same person had approached me, I would have been resistant. I would have said, no, you're wrong. I know it sounds bad. I know it doesn't seem really up and up, but you've missed the point. No, he's okay. I'm fine. It really depends. And the key is, I say it's on the back of my book. You never know you are in a cult. You only know you were in one. So if one
Hmm.
of your friends or loved ones is in a cult and they have undue manipulative mind control, they have no idea. You do, but they don't. So they don't think they need rescuing. So really the key is to try and rescue and, as you say, grab by the collar that loved one before they get down that road. Now, if they're already in that situation and you recognize it, really the thing to do is you kind of do have to extricate them. However you do that, it's got to be legal and ethically, but you have to remove them from that situation because, Jim, you could have a brilliant conversation with a friend who's in a cult. You sit down over a cup of coffee. 2 hours later, your friend's like, Jim, you're right. I can't believe I fell for this. He goes back, he goes back to that group, whether it's the leader or other people in the cult, and within 20 minutes, the coded language, the language that that person understands from the cult leader, will undo everything you've told that person over the last 2 hours. You've got to
So,
remove that person for days at a time.
so what were the psychological tactics that were used by Uncle Robert? Was it anything specific, or was it just his overall greatness, his overall knowledge of what what tactics did he use? Can you think of any in
Yeah,
particular?
I mean, I would say he kind of used them all, right? I mean, it's what did he put in this soup? Well, he put in 15 ingredients, right? There's a lot that would go into that. And again, it was very slow and subtle. And I can give you, the red flags of a cult leader. And I would preface this by saying there's a difference between a cult and dysfunctional, unhealthy culture. You can have unhealthy, dysfunctional culture at a real estate office, at another business, at a church, at a government complex, whatever it is, Army, Navy. You could have dysfunctional culture. Doesn't make it a cult. But within both of those groups, the leader will share a lot of these same traits. Grandiose sense of self, right? I mean, this person just is always bragging about the incredible things they've done. They make all the rules, but none of them apply to them, right? So they never hold themselves to that same standard that you are held to. They'll act as a gatekeeper to God. And probably the biggest one, really if you're going to remember one thing, they hate questions. They absolutely hate questions. If someone hates questions, that's a red flag. Because listen, the truth doesn't mind being questioned. I know the Bible to be the truth. You can ask me anything. I might not have a very good answer, but I'm not worried about it. I'd like to find the truth. Ask me anything. Cult leaders don't like questions. That's a problem.
And in our society right now, there is a lot of that with even political discussions where
Right.
people of either side won't discuss it. They're not having conversations. It could be cult-like. Maybe it is cult-like. Who knows? But we see a lot of these situations, I think, in just our general life. Peter, I'm really interested if you're comfortable in talking about your children. Where were they along this path? If you can talk, if you feel comfortable talking about that.
So we had five children. They ranged from late 20s down to mid-teens. And, you know, according to the courts, this is not just me, but they will view any kind of cult activity as abusive to children. Thankfully, in our case, there was no physical or sexual violence or abuse. And we homeschooled for many years, so we were around our kids all the time. There was none of
Yeah,
that, thank the Lord.
yeah,
But there was, mental, emotional, and spiritual abuse. There's no question. So, when Paige left me, she and Uncle Robert started a very vicious campaign of parental alienation. So that's where one parent tries to alienate the kids from the other. So Paige and Uncle Robert started to teach the children that I was the devil. I mean, they literally called me the devil, that I was Satan, a sorcerer, a bloodline, and a sperm donor. With the idea being that once they kind of got me out of the picture, where I'm just a dad, I'm not really a father to be respected, I'm just a dad. And I would show up and visit every now and then. And then the idea was that then Uncle Robert would kind of step into the role as the children's true father. Because my in laws, who are now in their late 70s and early 80s, about the same age as Uncle Robert, they called him dad. They
yeah.
called Uncle Robert dad.
It's
And
so
so that was,
weird. It's so weird, Peter.
oh, it's bizarre and it's unhealthy too, because that's another trait of cult leaders where they try and either destroy or blur the lines of the nuclear family. So again, biblically, I mean, whatever you think of me, the father and mother are supposed to be respected. That's one of the Ten Commandments, right? And they're supposed to be, cleave to each other, and they are one. But yet, I was constantly being, denigrated and kind of beaten down in my role as father, and so that the kids would then look to this 80-year-old guy, Uncle Robert, as their father. I mean, it's just wicked and unbiblical in so many different ways.
Yeah. So the courts were favorable to you. They understood. And how public was this whole thing? Did you go through the court system in your home county? I mean,
Yeah,
how,
so I again when she left me, I was terrified of my own shadow. So the idea of going to court was terrifying to me. And yet now having been through it, you learn a lot. So when I started sharing letters and emails from Uncle Robert and Paige that they were sending me, and it took me about a year to recover from the brainwashing. And I was only brainwashed for about 2 or 3 years. It took me a full year to finally recover and say, wow, it was Uncle Robert was the problem. So they would send me these letters and emails, and all my friends and family, who again weren't in the cult, saw this, immediately saw the danger. And they said we needed a guardian ad litem. So we got one. And I didn't know what it was. But that's somebody the court appoints to look after the best interests of the children in a high
say that
conflict
again, repeat
course.
that. They appointed who? What are they called?
A guardian ad litem.
Okay.
And
Ad
guardian
litem.
ad litem, I believe it's a French or Latin term, I think it's Latin, is someone who's appointed by the court in a very contentious divorce to look after the best interests of the children. So a year after Paige left, she wrote this jaw-dropping report in our case, and the court sent the three youngest kids, because she left with the three youngest, took them to her parents' house. They sent them back to me. And, she had supervised visits for like 6, 7 years because she continued to believe that I was the devil, I was wrong, she was a martyr, the courts were out to get her. And everybody saw it. I mean, my attorneys, multiple guardian ad litems, parenting evaluators, judges, they all saw the same thing. And so again, like, Paige, despite everything that she's said and done, which has been pretty bad, she's a victim too. She's a victim of Uncle Robert's manipulation, and she doesn't see it. She means well. I mean, she loves her kids, but the influence of Uncle Robert is wicked and abusive. And that's why I fought. I never wanted the divorce. I tried to save my marriage. I hated to go through it. I hate the fact that I'm divorced, that I have an ex-wife. But I know, in my mind and heart that I did the right thing by trying to protect my kids from the influence of Robert Booty.
And so, where are you going with this now? Obviously, you wrote the book.
Mhm.
You laid it all out there. I mean, you did not hold back from what I could tell. I'm certain there's things that you couldn't say or wouldn't say, but you're speaking to people, you're offering help, you're doing podcasts like this. I know that you've appeared on over 60 podcast shows, across the US, UK, Australia. And for those listening, find them. If you want to know more, first of all, grab the book. But if you want to know more, I'm sure there's podcast hosts that do a much better job than me in speaking to you and doing an interview with you. But there's so much out there. So, what is your mission now? What do you see your life going forward to be?
I'll say it this way. I grew up and I was obsessed with being the next Larry Bird, and I was going to go to college and then make the NBA and be Larry Bird's teammate, and that didn't happen. And then I got into coaching, and I spent a few years coaching basketball, and I was going to be the next John Wooden or Mike Krzyzewski, and that didn't happen. And then I got into sports broadcasting, and I was going to be the next Bob Costas or Al Michaels, and that didn't happen. Now I write, I tell stories. I love to share the gospel and principles about life through sports stories, and in addition to my memoir. And I'm not trying to be the next John Steinbeck or Louis L'Amour or John Grisham. I finally learned in my 40s and 50s that the Lord made me for a reason, not to try and be somebody else, and not to put my identity in what I do, but in who I am. I'm a son of God. I'm a Christian. I follow Christ. What I do is I love to write and tell stories. So I really feel like that's my gift. I love sharing my stories, either in the written format or in a podcast. So I keep writing. I've got 3 books out there, working on my fourth, and just trying to share my stories. Hopefully, they have a positive impact. And really, too, Jim, just to be a dad. I mean, right now, I still have 2 kids living at home with me. I'm just trying to be the best dad I can be.
They're in high school. Two kids are in high school.
One child is still in high school. The other one just graduated.
Okay. All right. So you've written a couple other books. You've written a book in case people want to check it out called The Blue Team. Your other book is called The Wardrobe of the Wolf, both sports books. Is
Yep.
correct?
And so those are the first 2 books in a 3-book series. And so the Blue Team came out 2016. Wardrobe of the Wolf last year. And so then the third book, the final book in the trilogy, will be later this year called East of Ashton. They're very autobiographical. Again, they're fiction. I joke in the Blue Team, the main character in the team is really good. That's where the fiction comes in because I wasn't very good, nor was my team. But a lot of these themes that happened in my life, a lot of the lessons I learned, I put into my books. And so I feel like, the lessons that you can learn from playing sports, whether it's football, basketball, or baseball, those life lessons about hard work, respect for authority, goal setting, etc., can also be applied to the broker, the banker, or the butcher, whomever you are, right? That's what I love about sports. It's the lessons we
Yeah.
can learn.
Yeah. So I want to tell people a little bit more about you that I didn't include in the introduction, but you were a sports broadcaster for 2 decades, appearing on networks, as I mentioned before, ESPN, CBS, Fox, A&E, OLN. And you've spoken publicly to large and small groups in Montana, Idaho, and several foreign countries regarding the principles in your books. So when you speak, do you speak on this book or is it primarily on the others?
It depends. So before the memoir came out, I would speak about the blue team over my shoulder, and I loved to speak about that book because it wasn't like I'm trying to describe the plot of a book, but it's more along the lines of the lessons to be learned. Now, oftentimes, I do share, like in this podcast, I think the story that really resonates with an audience, and probably the most applicable one, is the warning about small cults and undue manipulation. But really, the story within the story of the blue team was that um, your greatest adversary is not the guy trying to block your shot or the teammate who won't pass you the ball or the coach who won't start you. It's your own mind. And when the Lord saves us, he saves us from ourselves, right? And so the victory is really won right here. So go back to like, the golf analogy, right? Like I'm sure a lot of your podcast listeners play golf. So imagine you're on the putting green and you got your favorite putter, little white ball, and you're just practicing 10-foot putts for like an hour before you go play. Now imagine that same 10-foot putt on the 18th hole at the Masters Sunday, and you've got like a one-shot lead on, Tiger Woods or Phil Mickelson or somebody younger. That same 10-foot putt's a little different, isn't it? If you're a
Yeah,
golfer, your palms are probably sweating right now. That's where the game is won and lost in the mind.
interesting. There's a book, and I'm trying to find it right now. And let me just give me a second here. Uh, a book that I would suggest, even to you. It's a book by Coach Frosty Westering.
Hmm.
Frosty Westering was a football coach at Pacific Lutheran University, and he wrote a book called "Make the Big Time Wherever You Are," and
Hmm.
it kind of touches maybe on what you're not Larry Bird, you never were going to be Larry Bird, but you shot for it. But you need to make the big time, whether you're in Bozeman, Montana, or whether you're in Dallas, Texas.
Right.
A book I'd strongly suggest. Peter, so when I talk to people, when I have conversations like I am with you, I always end by asking this question. And it's one we haven't talked about, rehearsed, or we didn't rehearse any of this, but um, what is the one question that you wish I would have asked you that I didn't?
Hmm.
Is there one thing that you want, maybe, I don't want to speak for you, the audience to know is what should I have asked? I mean, I read your book, I did research, but I know I'm missing something.
Yeah, I think you asked really a lot of good questions that I'm trying to, rack my brain. I'm sure, in 10 minutes I'll come, oh, you should have asked me this. Um, I would say as a guy that's been divorced, I certainly don't want to be the one that says, well, let me give you marriage advice. But, we didn't really talk a whole lot about that. I mean, yes, my marriage failed, but if the question was going to be, well, okay, for, a married couple out there that have a guy like Uncle Robert in your life, what would you do? That's probably the one question that I would say, you could have asked. And
Yeah,
the answer
yeah.
to that is, to me, strong marriage has to have Christ in the center. No parent, no child, no priest, no pastor. They can all help from the outside, right? On the outside, they can help that marriage. In the center has to be Christ. We had a guru named Uncle Robert. So as long as he held that authority in my wife's life, our marriage was doomed. And so that's probably, again, I feel a little odd as a guy that got divorced sharing this, but I can tell you, learn from my failure. No
Mm,
one should get in between the husband and wife. All these people can help from the outside, and they should, but you should never have that other person in between the two, like we had.
mm. Well, that's great advice. And Peter, I enjoyed your book, enjoyed this conversation with you, and I'm hoping the people that are listening to this have gathered some some hope and strength for their relationships and
Right.
maybe in helping others with theirs. And I wish you the best of luck. What is your next book? Do you have a title yet?
I do. It's called East of Ashton. It's either East of Ashton or Green Timber. Green Timber flows a little bit easier, but East of Ashton is almost kind of a play on words of East of Eden, John
Okay.
Steinbeck's book, because
Yeah.
in the book, there are the two brothers and they have a lot of friction, kind of like Cain and Abel. And so it'll be out sometime later this year.
Yeah. And so do you self-publish all your own books? Do you have a publisher that's picked them up? What?
I do self-publish, and 20 years ago, self-publishing was pretty hard. Nowadays, it's amazing. I mean, it's
Yeah.
amazing what you can do self-publishing. So yeah, I get all my books on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Kobo and places like that.
Well, and no one controls you,
That's right.
right?
Right.
No one could. I wrote a book, and I know that as much as I thought I wanted a publisher to pick it up, I kind of wised up and thought, why am I doing this? I don't want control
Right.
of this. I want to be able to do what I want to do with it. So listen, Peter, I hope we have a chance to talk again and
Right.
maybe you're in real estate. Maybe we can do a real estate deal together or something in the future, huh?
That'd be nice. Yeah,
Uh,
send some buyers Montana way.
and same for Dallas. A lot of people
Very
are
good.
moving here. So Hey, thank you so much for joining me. And audience, thank you so much for joining me as well on another edition of Senior to Seniors. Have a great day.